It's been said that poetry is the most musical of literary forms. A case in point, the work of our next guest, writer and poet Angus Whyte. Angus, welcome.
Thank you, David.
Now, I know that you are a longtime musician, composer, harpsichordist, keyboardist, and that's how I've come to know you. So when I found that you were writing poetry, it didn't surprise me that some of that poetry had a musical bent. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, I like words, and I like rhythm, and I sometimes like words to rhyme, and I sometimes like alliteration and internal rhyme, and those things kind of amuse me.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things I noticed reading through your poetry was there's at least one poem, quite a long poem, that is set to waltz rhythm.
There are actually two poems in waltz rhythm, yes.
Now, how do you set a poem to waltz rhythm? Do you hum it in your brain?
No,
or
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. And what gave you the idea for that? And tell me about those specific waltz rhythm poems.
One's called Hymn, and it's about a wish poem about an imaginary partner that one might like to have, and the other is called Dyke. I think that's self-explanatory.
It's not D-I-K-E, D-Y.
No, no.
But there's probably some alliteration in there.
A lot of both, yes.
Right, right. Well, we're going to talk to you about your inspiration for your works, but I'd like to start, you brought with you also not a poem, but a short story.
Yeah, a very short one that I actually wrote for you.
Well, that I didn't know. You've surprised me on set. That doesn't happen very often, so go ahead. I'll take a chance.
Okay. Well, it started a week before Thanksgiving, and I was thinking, what am I going to say to David? I have no idea. And then I thought, I should tell him a short story. So I was getting ready for Thanksgiving, and at Halloween, friends had given us a huge pumpkin. I mean, really enormous. It was that big, and it was sitting outside for 2 weeks, and I decided to cook it. And it was so big, I didn't have a knife big enough, so I got a saw, and I sawed it. Well, first I carried it into the kitchen, and I realized there was no way this thing was going to fit into the oven. So I got the saw and sawed it into 6 places, and that reminded me of a story I'd heard. So I turned the story into a little Thanksgiving recipe, because I wanted to have something new to show you.
And fresh, and here we go. It's perfect for the holiday season as we start a new year.
Okay. First, you take a struggling medical student living in London. He has on a whim decided to invite 10 friends to Christmas dinner. Realizing you have no money to buy a traditional goose, you chance on the brilliant idea of poaching a swan from Her Majesty's pond, which you pass frequently to and from your way to medical school. Consequently, in the dead of night, you complete your sordid task and take the dead bird back to your tiny flat, where you learn 2 things. First of all, the flesh of a swan is black, and secondly, the fowl is more than twice as large as your oven. Then, utilizing your recently honed surgical skills, you cut the bird into 6 pieces, hoping to cook at least 2 pieces at a time in the unfortunate little oven. Dismayed, almost to tears by the complications of the procedure, you decide to go out to the local gay pub and drown your frustrations in a pint or 2. There you meet an attractive fellow whom you chat up for a possible assignation and casually inform him you're a medical student and ask him what he's doing professionally in London. To your utmost chagrin, he tells you he is keeper of Her Majesty's swans, which causes you to turn pale and flee the pub with no further conversation. Back in the flat, you take hold of yourself and think what to do next, and it's surprisingly simple. You borrow a very large soup pot from a neighbor, then poach the uncooked meat, smiling at the glorious ultimate irony of serving your Christmas guests twice poached swan.
Now, there's so much in there, including the visual of a medical student in London taking one of the royal swans and cooking it. How much of that story is complete fantasy and how much is true?
It's all completely true. And it was told to me by a young medical student who is now a full-fledged doctor who lives in Canada, and I've known him for more than 20 years. And
does he know that he's the inspiration?
Yes, I sent it to him. And he said to me, fame at last.
Now, it sounds like you get your ideas from kind of moments of inspiration.
Yes.
So this was a dual inspiration. It's Thanksgiving, you have a pumpkin, and it reminded you of this story of the medical student.
Which I had never written down or even thought about.
Right.
It just came into my head, and I thought, I've got to write this down.
But when did you start writing?
Oh, 25 years ago, maybe longer. I was writing in high school, but I didn't think I was a writer, and I didn't keep any of that stuff, you know. My first story I remember when I was about 13 was a gay story.
And that was before you even knew you were gay.
Oh, of course I knew.
You knew before then.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I've looked at your collection of short stories, and it is clear that you like alliteration, and you like puns, and you like a visual punch to your stories.
Yeah.
When you write, do you think of them as music? For instance, when I write, I often see it as sculpture. I see, you know, a phrase here, a phrase here, a phrase there. But yours seem to flow like a melody.
Well, I have a tendency to write in very long sentences, which people criticize. So I'm trying to shorten my sentences and make things clearer.
Why do people, who criticizes them?
Well, my writer friends whom I've asked to look at different stories and things. So they suggest just shortening the sentences and making them clearer, and that's easy enough to do. But usually a poem just starts coming to me because of a word that gets stuck in my head, like a musical phrase gets stuck in one's head, and then it starts going. The New Mexico poem happened that way. I was on a plane going to Albuquerque, and that word stuck in my head, and I was thinking, what a strange word. So by the time I got there, I had a poem, which I'm happy to recite for you.
Is this one of the ones you have? Or you know,
yeah.
Please, the Albuquerque poem.
A quirky old redskin, whose methods were murky, was famed for his specially rarefied jerky, prepared in a Pueblo pub near Albuquerque from prepuce of perky, uncircumcised turkey. He was asked subsequently to lecture at Berkeley.
So humor is also part of your work.
Yeah.
That sounds a little bit like the structure of one of my favorite poets, Frank O'Hara. And some of your other poems I commented on have a sense, that kind of modern, whimsical feel about it. Is that
I hope
conscious
so.
on your point, or do you think some of it is like Frank O'Hara?
I haven't modeled my poems or my stories on anybody else. I've done so much professional writing for college journals, I've done some ghost writing, I did a company history. All this writing was lucrative, and I was glad to have the jobs to do it. But it wasn't ever my story or my stories. And so now at this late stage in my life, I've been writing the short stories and memoirs and recollections now for more than 20 years. So I was very lucky this year to be invited to an artists and writers retreat in France, where I had a whole month to, well, stay inside out of the rain and work on my 2 books of stories. So the first one is ready for publication, and that's the next issue because it's easier to write them than to get them published.
Always.
And then the next storybook is almost completely finished.
And they're called After Dinner Tales?
The first one is called After Dinner Tales. I haven't given a title to the second one yet.
Right. Which is harder, first, writing music or writing words? And second, which do you enjoy more, or is that a fair question?
I don't consider myself a composer. I'm really a performer. I'm at this point an amateur performer, and that means I love it because I do it because I love it, from the verb to love, and that's what an amateur is. And I was professional, but it was too hard. I was schlepping my harpsichord all over the place, and my fingers.
Which is not it's not a small instrument to schlepp.
No, it isn't. So no, I do it because I really enjoy it, and I think I have original stories to tell, and I want to tell them before I croak.
Right.
Very simple.
And which do you like writing more, poetry or short stories?
Both. I think I like writing the short stories better, but I used to write more poetry than short stories.
Yeah, I guess amateur. I never really thought about the root of the word, and so I guess in a sense I'm an amateur poet because I write poetry when I like to or love to or something pops in my mind. But I like forms. I've always liked the form of the villanelle and the haiku. Do you like certain forms of poem, or are you just free form?
I do a lot of free form, and I do a lot of rhyming, and I'm especially pleased with the waltz poems.
Yeah, well, the Albuquerque one has a lot of rhyming in it.
Right,
You brought us another poem as well, correct?
This one is something I heard. I actually, my friend Vicky in Boston said this one day. We were talking, and she was a dark-haired, voluptuous girl who had trouble finding and keeping a boyfriend. And we were just talking, and she said this, and I wrote it down afterwards because I said, you know, that's a poem. This is called Miss Vicky's Lament. All I want is a sense of humor, a little sincerity, and a lot of muscle tone. Fast with the check, and if he's tall and rich and has broad shoulders, that's all right too. I want a boyfriend.
So it's a poem from real life.
From real life.
When you publish this book of poetry, is there going to be a long dedication list to all the people whose words and humor inspired you?
I haven't got that far yet. Maybe. There is in the after dinner tales, yes. I dedicated most of the stories in there to different friends.
Right, right. When you were in France on this retreat, did it strike you sitting there going, you know, I've been a musician, I've been a performer, I've traveled the world. Gosh, never thought I'd be sitting here as a writer on a writer's retreat. Did it kind of catch you off guard?
Well, I thought about it the week before, and you know what I did? I got on my computer and printed out a new card that said Angus Whyte, writer. And there it was staring at me, and I put my address and my email and my info on it. And I thought, now I have to believe it. If I give out these cards, it's real.
Do you believe it?
Oh, yeah.
How long did that take?
About a week and a half.
Well, I mean, there are people who say that we're all a writer. There's just some writers who write and some writers who don't write. You know, P.D. James didn't start writing her books until after a successful career as a British bureaucrat. So we all have different times that inspire us. Why do you think at this point in your life you felt, I got to start putting stuff down on paper?
Because we feel the pressure of time. And I've always told stories after dinner. You know, you have a couple of drinks, some wine with dinner, maybe a little extra, and then you start telling stories. And my friends kept saying, please write these down. You really have to write these down. And for a long time, I just thought they were, you know, jacking me up, but I didn't do it. And then finally I decided, okay, I think they mean it. So I started doing it.
Well, from what I hear, we're all going to be very grateful. So
I
I look forward to hearing and seeing the poetry in print and reading After Dinner Tales.
Thank you, David.
We've been speaking with Angus Whyte, poet, writer. Next up, we're going to meet filmmaker Fred Finkelstein and turn to learn about his new film about children suffering from psoriasis. We'll be right back.